Do you know the story of Sir Ernest Shackleton's Trans-Imperial Antarctic expedition? It's an epic tale that challenges biblical fables and Greek tragedies. And as we kiss the ass of 2020 goodbye, I think it's a tale worth retelling. Endurance, Shackleton's incredible voyage. This is the first post for my YouTube channel, where I share books and stuff that have been important to me throughout the years. For the most part, these are not new works, but rather older ones that have stood the test of time, or have had some important meaning to me in my life. I review them in current context and try to bring some meaning to the current events through themes in these older works. And with 2020 behind us, I thought it was important to share this true story about Ernest Shackleton, his captain Frank Worsley, and the crew of the Endurance. The goal was simple enough, to cross the Antarctic continent, but the Endurance became trapped in the ice. I chose this as the first to share on my blog when it was originally thewalkingcircle.com, and now it's dappergenius.com. I think it's the first one to share here as well as there when I did it originally, because it's an excellent example of a well-written story. And even though it's true, it has all the elements and plot points of good fiction. We have a cantankerous but famous leader of the expedition in Sir Ernest Shackleton. He's kind of a Burt Rutan for his day, except that instead of trying to go to space or to go to Mars like Elon Musk, he wants to conquer the last inhospitable places here on Earth. We also have a loyal captain in Frank Worsley, who becomes a legendary navigator because of his skills in crossing the Drake Passage. And we have a diverse crew of 27 seasoned adventurers. Their true life adventure even follows the standard hero's narrative, going from orphan to wanderer to warrior, and finally to rescue. Endurance, Shackleton's incredible voyage, was written by Alfred Lansing. And if you have an Audible subscription, I highly recommend the Audible version, which is narrated by Simon Preble and put together by Blackstone Audio. It's fantastic, and I have turned to it many times when I have been involved in difficult projects, or as in the last time, I was actually sick in bed. Now, this was pre-COVID, but I'm pretty sure I had the flu, and I used my mini echoes around the house to listen to the book. And it kind of inspired me to get through my difficult time, because it was nothing compared to what the crew of the Endurance endured. It could have been just another retelling of Shackleton's ill-fated expedition, and if you just want the facts of what happened, what the crew went through, and see lots of good photos and some reenactments of what happens on this journey, then there's a documentary called Shackleton's Captain, and I think that's a good choice for that. Lansing's work is simply written. He weaves together the diary of the crew into kind of this close first-person narrative of the tale. And the events, they start in December of 1914 and end of August of 1916. So you can see this isn't a casual adventure. This wasn't a weekend out or a missing child or something for a few weeks or a few months or someone lost in the wood. This was a couple of years of being trapped on the ice. And we see this story through the eyes of these diary entries. We get a picture of the crew because we're getting the entries directly from the crew members, but we also get a picture of Shackleton and his captain Worsley. Now, Shackleton, through these entries, is made out as kind of a recluse and a little too careful. He's too conservative with some of his decisions, and some of the crew members think, including Worsley, that maybe he's just a little too slow on some of his decisions. So they take off from South Georgia Island and they head to the Weddell Sea, where the plan is to have other boats leave supplies for them on the continent, and then they will pick up those supplies and travel across the continent by sled and on foot, which is still a common practice today. Now, the Endurance is a special ship. It's made to withstand the ice. It's a wooden ship, but it's been reinforced. It has a steam engine so that it can plow through the ice if it becomes stuck, and it's kind of expected that that's what's going to happen, that they are going to get stuck in the ice, and sure enough they do. And when the ice flows change in the Weddell Sea, they eventually become stuck. And it's not a big deal at first, or they're not too concerned about it at all. They even have shows. There's plenty of food because the penguins and seals that are around them are basically tame. They don't know humans. They are easy to get a hold of to kill for food. And if you kill like one of these giant walruses, that some of them that are the size of their lifeboats, they can kill these walruses and use their blubber to make fires. So they're not very concerned about being stuck here in the ice. But gradually the ice shifts and it carries them away from the continent and it cracks the Endurance and they have to abandon the ship. And when they do, they take their 3 lifeboats with them, they tie ropes to them and drag them along the ice. And this story in and of itself, just dragging these boats across these ice floes, is an adventure tale just in and of itself. But eventually the ice melts from under them and they have to get in the water and they have to put the boats in the water and they have to try to shoot for dry land. Now originally they were going to shoot for Deception Island, which had been their intent all along. I think there was a church there, and there's a church that whalers visit and leave supplies and occasionally come and resupply. So they hope that if they can get to Deception Island, which is just off of the Antarctic continent itself, then they'll be rescued by the whalers. But the weather and the ice is against them. They're unable to reach Deception Island. And the currents and everything, the ice is enormous. I mean, you're talking like skyscraper-sized icebergs next to these little boats. And so they decide to make for Elephant Island instead, which is further away, further out in the Antarctic continent, and almost like it's a dot in the sea, really. It's further out than the rest of the chains that are closer to the continent. And it's going to be risky, because if they miss Elephant Island, then they're going to end up adrift in the ocean. But they take a chance, and they make for Elephant Island, and they manage to get to the island. And they're exhausted, they're wet, they're hungry, they're tired, but when they look around, they realize that where they've stopped, where they've got onto land, that the high tide will come in and bring the ice with it, and it's going to crush them. So they have to get back in the boats, back into the water again, and this is another day that they're like in the boats before they finally find a place on Elephant Island where they're going to be safe and secure. And that's where they have to make a big decision about what they're going to do for survival. So now they have to decide, are they going to go for rescue, or are they just going to sit here and hope that a whaler or some other ship eventually passes by Elephant Island, which isn't likely to happen. So they decide to strip the other boats and make one good boat. They call it the James Caird, and it's the James Caird which was the larger of the lifeboats. And they decide that they're going to take this boat across the Drake Passage to get help. So it's 5 of the crew members, including Shackleton and Worsley, that are going to go get help and come back with supplies with another expedition to rescue the remainder of the party, of the crew. So this means that everyone left behind has to trust, first of all, that the people getting on the James Caird are even going to make it to Elephant Island, and that they're also going to be able to come back in a reasonable amount of time to rescue the remaining crew. So this is the story where, really, after being orphaned by the sinking of the Endurance, and then wandering across the ice by dragging the boats across the ice, trying to make for Deception Island, and then finally in the water. Now we're making our final decision as our heroes in the story to literally do battle with the Drake Passage. This is one of the most difficult pieces of ocean on Earth to cross. It's difficult even for larger ships, and they're going to be crossing at a time, the worst time of the year for storms, and the way the currents and everything are going to be working against them. So they prepare the James Caird with lots of rocks. They give it some ballast, a special kind of anchor. All this is Shackleton being a little cautious again, a little extra careful. And they make out across the Drake Passage. And this becomes just a magnificent piece of navigation by Worsley. First of all, they're basically going from this little speck in the ocean to another little speck in the ocean across what really is the worst place on Earth for the oceans. The waves are like 50 feet in size, and the spray comes over the boat, and the spray then freezes to the boat, and it causes ice on the little ship and tilts it, and they have to go out and chop it all off. And just this crossing of the Drake Passage in this little boat is a whole story in and of itself. So they finally make it back to South Georgia. And they were heading for Stromness, but that's where the whaling community is. That's where they left from. And the weather turns against them, and they end up on the far side of the island. But now only 3 of them have the strength to go on. So they're going to leave 2 back. If they try to take the boat again, it's going to end up adrift. So, which means they have to cross the island, which is basically a mountain. It's not any more hospitable really than the Antarctic. In fact, I think the only people to this day that have crossed over South Georgia from one side to the other is Shackleton and his men. They climb the mountain, and when they get to the top, we're really now on our third adventure story at this point. When they get to the top of the mountain, they're either going to die from exposure or they're going to have to hurry up and get down the side of the mountain because the weather is coming in again and they don't have any way to camp and survive up here. So they make this crude sled out of their remaining gear and they slide 2,000 feet down the side of the mountain. If you can imagine like a water park slide, you know, or even just skiing, you know, these helicopter skiers, this is like 1,000 times bigger than that. They slide down the side of the mountain to end up just a few hundred feet above Stromness. But no one in Stromness knows they're there. They can see it, they can see the fires, they can see the lights, they can see people walking around, they can hear the bells, but no one knows these guys are on top of this cliff. And to top it off, there's a frozen waterfall going over the edge of the cliff. So it's not going to be easy to get down. So they take the last of their rope, they piece it together, and they climb down, and they get to safety. And they get to Stromness, and they get help. And they return to Elephant Island. And there, through some miracle in and of itself, that's a whole nother story, is the crew of the Endurance. All of them alive, waiting for Shackleton to come back and rescue them. This, in 2020 especially, first of all, just as an adventure story, you think about adventure stories we write, like I write at dappergenius.com. My science fiction, there's someone that's got to pay the price for the adventure, you know. There's someone that sacrifices their life for the better good, or there's someone that charges into the battle and to let everyone else escape, and he gets killed while everyone else manages to get to safety. But in this story, that didn't happen. With the Endurance, no one gave their life, no one sacrificed themselves, no one raced into battle or whatnot. They all survived. So first of all, there's that. Now, think of 2020. Think of COVID-19, of the coronavirus, and how we, especially as Americans, have kind of reacted to this virus. We didn't jump into it all together and say, hey, everyone is going to survive. No, that didn't happen. We weren't even really saying, hey, one of you out there, you got to go and die for the rest of us. So actually, I guess we did. Early on, there was a lieutenant governor from Texas who said, you know, maybe we should go ahead and go out there and get sick, or maybe grandma and grandpa should get sick or something like that, and maybe they'll die, but that'll be better for all the rest of us. Just go ahead and get sick, and then the rest of us will be okay. And then we're all okay with that. And we're not. I called it the cult of death. And there were some countries that were kind of that way as well. And then now think of the first responders, especially here in America, where we're always making a big deal about the first responders, about how they race into the buildings on 9/11, on 9/11, about how they race into the giant fire, or they bring out survivors from the forest fires. Or there's a mass shooting, like say in Las Vegas, where the cops went towards the bullets, or they went after the man that was shooting all those people in Las Vegas. But when it became inconvenient, when individuals were going to have their dinner interrupted, or their movie time, or their concert time, or their basketball, their football time, well then screw the first responders. Screw the doctors and the nurses who are working 6 days a week, 20 hours a day to see our loved ones through this difficult period. Those nurses and doctors are first responders. And every time an individual, you as an individual or some other individual, takes some selfish action, maybe to go to grandma's, maybe you want to go to Mother's for Thanksgiving. I wanted to go to Mother's for Thanksgiving. On the dappergenius.com, I have an annual post that I refresh most years, and it's called Mother's Thanksgiving. It's an essay, kind of a short story, a heartwarming tale about my mother and a difficult time that we had, and the Thanksgiving that we have every year at my mother's place. Now, we didn't go this year. We stayed home. Everyone stayed home. And Mother didn't even ask us this year if we wanted to go. So I've updated the post a little bit to reflect some of that. And I want you to think about the crew of the Endurance and how they survived through 1914 to 1916. Some of these individuals ended up dying in World War I, and that's where they died, in combat, which that's a whole nother thing if you have an ethical dilemma with violence the way that I do. A lot of them even survived. I don't think any of them died in the 1918 flu. They all survived the 1918 flu, which was 2 years after they survived the Antarctic continent. And I think that's important, that the crew of the Endurance survived. And I think that it's important tale to revisit now in 2021, when you can go get your vaccine. And it's up to the rest of us. It's coming for the rest of us. Right now, we want to get all the first responders vaccinated. So when you go out, wear a mask. Better just stay home. And put aside those selfish desires. And think about those crews in the hospitals, those nurses and doctors, the admin people, the cleaning crew, everyone in the hospitals, and what they're doing to give the rest of us a chance to survive.